Allah. And every hardship, it does come to an end. So when we are sad, we should not forget the blessings, the mercy, the kindness, the goodness that comes to us from Allah Azza wa Jal. And when we are happy, then we should not be completely unable to think about and to process and to feel the sorrow of those events that should be on our mind and should have an effect on our heart and on our soul. I might graduate, and on that same day that I celebrate my graduation, there may be many things that also should bring sadness to my heart. Whether they are tragedies that are taking place in the world around me, or maybe that happy occasion is the day of sadness for Ahlul Bayt. And I shouldn't say that, well, this is my time to celebrate and so I don't want to have any sadness. So always remember that this is the nature of our life that Allah has created in His wisdom. That in this world we do not have any perfect happiness and we do not have any absolute sadness. Even when we are mourning the martyrdom of Imam Hussein and his family and his companions on Ashura, which is the most sad and tragic occasion that has occurred in humanity, not in our time or in the ummah of our Prophet, but in all of humanity, a tragedy that was mourned before it occurred by our Prophet, by Imam Ali, by Fatima Zahra, by the previous prophets that came before our own Prophet. But even in that supreme tragedy, Sayyida Zainab alayhi salam says, "Ma ra'aytu illa jamila." I saw a manifestation of the beautiful decree of Allah. Because it is that sacrifice that became an inspiration for humanity, that became the irrigation that ensured that Islam would never be erased, no matter how much the enemy and the oppressors may wish. It is a tragedy, and it is mourned in the heavens as well as in the earth. But there is also jameel and beauty and inspiration and victory that comes from that tragedy. So if that is true of Karbala, that along with the mourning, we also have strength and inspiration and a great example and role model that we learn, then I should never think that the small tragedies that I feel or I face in my life, they are too much for me to bear. They should never overwhelm me and make me feel like there's nothing worth living for or there is nothing good. Because nothing is a greater tragedy than the tragedy that befell Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad alayhi salatu wassalam in Karbala. Salawat ala Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad. That is just a reminder for us, because sometimes when people see great crimes in the news, when they see great suffering, then they lose hope in life and in humanity, and they sometimes think that everything is dark, and then their soul becomes darkened and disillusioned, and it becomes difficult to see the good in the world. But once again, we derive inspiration from the example of Imam Hussein in Karbala. He says, هَوَّنَ عَلَيَّ مَا نَزَلَ بِي أَنَّهُ بِعَيْنِ اللَّهِ. That yes, you see that darkness of the forces of evil. beating their drums and sharpening their swords in order to attack the family and the survivors of our Prophet. But Imam Hussein says that whatever I am facing and whatever I am suffering, it hawwana alayya ma nazala bi. It makes it easy for me to bear, to know that this is not just coincidence. This is not a period in which shaitan is ruling according to his desire. Yazid is not a king who governs the affairs of the world, but it is according to a plan that Allah has. It is in front of the sight of Allah, and Allah does not let anything happen that does not have a benefit and a greater good for Islam and for the believers and for Ahlul Bayt. That does not take away from the tragedy, but it gives us hope and inspiration even within tragedy. And one of those tragedies that took place is the martyrdom of our seventh Imam. So a few words just to reacquaint us with who our Imam was. As you know, his name was Musa, and we know of him as Musa ibn Ja'far because he was the son of Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq alayhi salam. So our Imam, he was born in the household of the Prophet. His father was the previous Imam, and his mother was a very noble lady known as Humayda al-Barbariya, or sometimes vocalized as Hamida al-Barbariya. A lady of great piety and purity, very highly praised by Ahlul Bayt. And Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq alayhi salam had a great love for Humayda because of her character and her virtues. There was a journey of Hajj that our sixth Imam and Humayda, his wife, they had taken together to Mecca. And on the return from that journey of Hajj, Imam Musa Al-Kadhim alayhi salatu wassalam was born in a place known as Al-Abwa. Al-Abwa is a small town between Mecca and Medina. And our Imam was born there because his parents, our sixth Imam and his wife Humayda, they had gone for Hajj. It was on the return from Hajj that our seventh Imam was born. Now, these days you perform Hajj and then you fly out of Mecca, and usually it will be maybe 10 days or a few weeks at most after the rituals of Hajj that you will leave. But in earlier times, people would travel on foot and by camel, and they would often stay for a longer period in Mecca for worship. And our Imams would sometimes stay because when people came for Hajj and there were great multitudes of people, it would give an opportunity and freedom for the Imams to meet their Shia and their lovers from different parts of the world. So it wasn't just a trip for Hajj, but it was a trip for Hajj and an opportunity for the Imams to teach and for the lovers and followers of the Imam to learn. Many of the ahadith that we have narrated from our Imams, Imam Muhammad al-Baqir and Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq and Imam Musa al-Kadhim alayhim salam, these ahadith were narrated or were heard from the Imam in these journeys of Hajj. So in the year 128 after Hijrah, the sixth Imam and his wife, they had gone for Hajj, and they returned to Medina either in the month of Dhul Hijjah, right after Hajj, or according to another narration, they stayed in Mecca for a few months for that same purpose of teaching and conveying the ahadith of Ahlul Bayt and the teachings of the Prophet to the Shia, and then they returned to Medina in Safar. So there are two narrations about the date of the birth of our seventh Imam. One is that he was born on the 20th of Dhul Hijjah, and that is according to the view that this Hajj trip, it concluded, and Imam Ja'far Sadiq, he returned to Medina very soon after that. And so on the 20th of Dhul Hijjah, just 10 days after Eid, he was already in Abwa, which is that village almost halfway between Mecca and Medina. And the other opinion is that Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq, he stayed for a little longer period in Mecca, and then he returned to Medina in Safar, and it was on the 7th of Safar, the second month of the Islamic year, when our seventh Imam was born. So, two opinions, either the 7th of Safar or the 20th of Dhul Hijjah, and according to most narrations, it was the year 128 after the Hijrah of the Prophet, just a little bit more than 100 years after the death of Prophet Muhammad Mustafa sallallahu alaihi wa alihi, salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Now, Abwa is significant because this is also that same place where the mother of our Prophet, Amina bint Wahab, died and was buried. And on one of his journeys to Mecca, our Prophet, he also stopped there and he visited the grave of his mother and he wept at her grave. For those who say that to visit a grave is bid'ah, here is the Prophet of Allah after he had been appointed as a messenger by Allah, and this narration is found in both Shi'i and in Sunni sources. He went and he visited the grave of his mother who had died more than half a century earlier, more than 50 years earlier. And it wasn't a public cemetery that would have been widely known, so the Prophet made a point to go and visit, and he wept and prayed for mercy and forgiveness at the grave of his mother. That was the same place, Abwa. Our seventh Imam, he was born 20 years before the death of his father. So when Imam Musa Al-Kadhim became the Imam, he was only 20 years old. And in history, it is narrated that there were a number of people who had some doubts about whether Imam Musa Al-Kadhim is actually the Imam and is the successor of Imam Ja'far Sadiq or not. One of the reasons for this doubt was because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knew how much the government wanted to ensure that Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq does not have a successor who will be able to lead and guide the Shia as Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq had done during his life. And the government maybe have thought that, well, by the time the new Imam is able to send his messengers and his representatives to different communities, we will be able to get ahead and to stop the spread of the teachings of Ahlul Bayt. And so Allah chose to ensure that Imam Musa Al-Kadhim was young, that didn't raise the suspicion of the government. The Abbasid government, Mansur al-Abbasi, who had a very great jealousy of Imam Ja'far Sadiq and the love people had to Ahlul Bayt. And Imam Musa Kadhim also had an older brother He had one older brother named Ismail who had died during the lifetime of Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq. There was another brother named Abdullah, or better known as Abdullah al-Aftah. And he was older than Imam Musa Kadhim, and so many people with the tribal assumption that the older son is going to be the heir and the successor, they assumed that he would be the next Imam after Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq. So Imam Musa Kadhim was young, and his brother Abdullah was older, and many people, they had that assumption. But Allah decreed that very soon it became clear to people that although Abdullah al-Aftah was the son of the Imam, and he was born in the household of our sixth Imam, but he did not have the knowledge and the guidance, which does not come from learning and memorization, but only comes from the decree and the grace of Allah Azza wa Jal. And so, this was a gift by Allah to protect the life of Imam Musa al-Kadhim, that his youth and the fact that people did not know much about him at the very beginning of his imamat allowed him to quietly begin to call the Shia and to answer their questions and provide guidance to them. And very soon, Abdullah al-Aftah, he also left this world, and it became very well known among all people that Imam Musa al-Kadhim, in his knowledge and in his piety, in his character and in his teachings, he is the heir, the representative, and the successor of Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq alayhi salam. Now, if we exclude the Imam of our time, who is alive, and who is, although concealed from us, our leader and our guide, and the one to whom we pledge and we owe and we give our allegiance. If we exclude the Imam of our time, then the Imam who had the longest period of imamat is our seventh Imam, Imam Musa al-Kadhim. His imamat was about 35 years. And that is longer than the imamat of Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq or Imam Ali al-Naqi, whose imamat was about 34 years or a little bit more or a little bit less. So Imam Musa al-Kadhim, he had the longest period of imamat, other of course than the Imam of our own time. He didn't have the longest life, but he had the longest period of imamat, 35 years. And he was martyred in the time of the Caliph Harun in Baghdad. So that is a short summary of the biography of our seventh Imam. He was born to Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq and Humayda al-Barbariya in the year 128 in Al-Abwa in Hijaz, between Mecca and Medina. He assumed the office of imamat at the young age of 20, which until that time was the youngest age that an imamat had begun. And so it was something new, and it was something a little bit difficult for some people to understand, but Allah did that in His wisdom. And it was a form of protection for our Imam. And he assumed that position of leadership of the Shia for a period of 35 years until his martyrdom at the hands of Harun in the year 183. Now, what was this period of imamat like? The life of Imam Musa al-Kadhim. What was the condition of the Shia and of society in that time. It was in the period of our seventh Imam that the identity of the followers of Ahlul Bayt began to become clear and to be crystallized and to be recognizable as a school of thought. That might be a little bit surprising, because how do we know our madhab and our school of thought? We know of it as the Ja'fari school of thought, associated with and named after our sixth Imam, Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq alayhi salam. But in the time of Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq, the raw materials of the Islamic teaching were taught and spread by Ahlul Bayt. That took place by the teachings of our fifth and our sixth Imam and their students. So in Medina, Imam Muhammad Baqir, Imam Ja'far Sadiq, they taught. And their students, they carried those teachings to Kufa, and then from Kufa to Basra and Ahwaz and Baghdad and Qum and Ray and Neshabur, and to all of the frontiers of the Muslim world, in the east and in the west, to North Africa and wherever Muslims lived. But these ahadith were the raw materials from which Muslims were to learn their beliefs and their practices. But there was not a clearly recognizable group that people could point to and could say that these are the followers of Ahlul Bayt. That was still something that was in its infancy. And one of the reasons for that is because although the Shia had a clear set of teachings which came from one source, from Ahlul Bayt, but the broader Muslim community did not yet have a clear identity and a name. So today when we say what are the main groups of Muslims, we say Shia and Sunni. The Shia, they had a clear identity in that they were the followers of Ahlul Bayt. Specifically, they were the followers of Amir al-Mu'mineen, Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salatu wassalam, and the Imams who came from his descendants. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. But on the other side, the Sunnis did not have a clear identity. The Mu'tazili school of theology, which was rejected later on by the majority of the Sunnis, did not yet exist. The Ash'ari school of theology did not yet exist, which became dominant in the Sunni world and is dominant until today. Abu al-Hasan al-Ash'ari had not yet been born, let alone established his school of theology. None of the Sihah Sitta had been written yet. All of these Sihah, which collect the most authentic ahadith of the Prophet according to Ahlul Sunnah, they came about a century after Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq. Bukhari and Muslim, they lived and died in the time of our 10th and our 11th Imam, and they were not even born in the time of Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq. So the sources of what is considered to be Sunni doctrine and practice, they had not yet been formalized, and so you couldn't point to a book or a school of thought and say, this is what is the contrast to the Shi'i school of thought. Abu Hanifa was a contemporary of Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq, but he did not write any books. It was his students who wrote books. Imam Malik was a contemporary of our 7th Imam, and then Shafi'i and Ahmad ibn Hanbal, they came afterwards. So even the schools of law, they had not yet been formalized. There were other teachers and scholars in the Sunni world, but they did not have that formal book and school of thought that we think of when we think of Shia and Sunni as two schools of thought. So the point is that in the time of Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq alayhi salam, yes, there were teachings and there were students of Ahlul Bayt who would carry their doctrine, their teaching about how to practice our prayer, our fasting, our other obligations. But within society, there was not yet a clear identity of the school of Ahlul Bayt that could be recognized by society, by friend, so that they can learn and follow it, and by opponent or by those who followed other schools of law. This was a development that took place in the time of our seventh Imam, Imam Musa Al-Kadhim alayhi salam. When now the Shia, they had a clear set of teachers and books, and they had crystallized and formalized how to teach and convey their identity. So you see the growth of the Shia community from the time of Karbala, when oppression had been at its peak, and in the time after Karbala, when the number of people who would say we are followers of Ahlul Bayt could be counted on the fingers of one hand. The early imamat of Imam Zainul Abidin alayhi salam, it was that hidden and that difficult that the number of followers of our fourth Imam were counted on the fingers of a single hand. And then gradually, as it began to spread, first our Imams, they spread the teachings of the true message of Islam. And that task was fulfilled by our fourth and our fifth and our sixth Imam. And then in the period of our seventh Imam, he took the students that had learned the teachings and the ahadith that had been taught and the message that had been spread, and he organized the community not just into many different individuals, but into a cohesive and an organized community. And the way that he did that was that our seventh Imam established a system of wukala, of representatives, whom he appointed and he set to all different areas of the Muslim world to look after and to ensure the teaching and the affairs of the Shia were well taken care of. That's a lesson for us in our time, because we form our community and our relationships on the same basis that we were taught and that we received from Ahlul Bayt. As the oppression of the Abbasids reached its peak, Imam Musa Al-Kadhim, he instructed and he taught his followers and the lovers of Ahlul Bayt to organize themselves and to come together and to form a cohesive community so that we can support each other in times of hardship and reinforce not just our faith and our beliefs, but also come to each other's aid in times of need, when we feel sad, when we feel alone, when we have economic need. So when you have a cohesive community, then you are able to meet those spiritual as well as human needs that all of us experience. And that was the community that was forged and that was strengthened by our seventh Imam, Imam Musa Kadhim. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Now the miracle of what our Imam accomplished is even more inspiring for us to appreciate when we realize that although he had a long period of imamat, 35 years, but throughout that imamat, he was under the most strict surveillance and the most severe repression by the government of his time. From Mansur, who was the caliph at the beginning of his imamat, until Harun, who was the caliph that ordered the martyrdom of our seventh Imam. In Medina, he was under strict surveillance. And in Baghdad, he was also under house arrest, and there was always a spy and surveillance in his home. Now, some of you may know that the kunya of our seventh Imam is Abul Hasan. And the kunya of his son, our eighth Imam, is also Abul Hasan. But do you know why two Imams share the same kunya? If I say Qala Abul Hasan, then you have to specify who is this. Abul Hasan al-Awwal is Imam Musa al-Kadhim, and Abul Hasan al-Thani is Imam Ali Rida alayhi salam. Why did they share a kunya? Because of this oppression of the caliph. In the time of our Imams, people would learn a hadith with great difficulty from the Imam, but they would not dare to say that I was taught this by Imam Musa Kadhim or I was taught this by Imam Ali Rida. Because to say that, if it got to the ears of the caliph or one of his spies, would mean that the injustice and the suppression of the Imam would increase, and that person who narrated the hadith would also be arrested and sometimes even put to death. And that is why some of the ahadith that are narrated from our seventh Imam, Qala Abdun Salih, a noble servant of Allah said. They couldn't name that this was Imam Musa al-Kadhim. And according to narrations, because of that oppression that our seventh Imam lived, he gave his kunya to Imam Ali Rida. Nahalahu kunyata. Meaning what name he was known by, Abul Hasan. He said that I gift this to you, O my son, so that when people say Qala Abul Hasan, it wouldn't be known, is this referring to Imam Musa al-Kadhim or is it referring to Imam Ali Rida alayhi salam? This is one way in that period of oppression to kind of give a little bit of safety and a little bit of concealment to the Imam. And when he gave his son his kunya, then Imam Musa Kadhim adopted another kunya. A kunya is a name that is kind of like a term of honor that is used to refer to somebody who is held in great respect and esteem. So once he had given his son that kunya, Abul Hasan, which used to be the kunya of the seventh Imam himself, then he adopted the kunya Abu Ibrahim. So you will see some ahadith from our seventh Imam, Qala Abul Hasan, that was the honorific by which he was known. And then towards the end of his life, there are some ahadith, Qala Abu Ibrahim. Abu Ibrahim said, this is after he had given that honorific to his son, the eighth Imam, and he had adopted another honorific, which is Abu Ibrahim. So you can see just from these circumstances how severe was the oppression that our Imam lived in. Where even to name the Imam was risking your life. And the Imam had to adopt these means to be able to protect himself and the Imam after him and still convey the message to the Shia. In spite of that oppression, it was the wisdom of the Imam and it was the courage of the followers of the Imam that the message of the Imam spread, and those communities were formed throughout the Muslim world. And even though the government had all the power and the Imam was a prisoner of the Caliph, but the Imam was held in such love and respect that the Caliph, at the height of his power and wealth, became jealous of the Imam who was his prisoner. And that is what led to the martyrdom of our Imam. Before we talk about his martyrdom, just a few gifts that we have learned from the Imam, his teachings, and his instructions for us to live our life by and to be guided by. It is narrated that our seventh Imam, Imam Musa Al-Kadhim alayhi salatu wassalam, sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad, he said, Al-Maghboon man ghubina umarahu sa'a. Sometimes we feel taken advantage of. And normally, we feel that we suffer a loss or we are taken advantage of if we have a material loss. So if I buy something, for example, and I think I got a good deal. I shopped around, I found a discount, and then I find out after I buy it that somebody else was able to get an even bigger discount. I feel like, oh, I lost out. But the Imam says that this is not ghabn, this is not a loss, this is not a kind of deception that you need to worry about. Because whatever material loss, maybe you overpaid 10% or 20%, that's not permanent. It can come back to you. And even if it doesn't come back to you in the future, it's just a loss of something material. It wasn't ever going to be there forever anyway. But what is a true loss? Al-Maghboon man ghubina umurahu sa'a. If you lose 1 hour of your life and you spend it in something that is not worthy of your attention and your time, then you are at a loss. Because if you lose money, you can earn it back. Allah can give it to you. But if you lose your time, then it is not coming back. So be conscious of the value of your time and your life. And whatever you might feel about the loss of money, don't worry so much about it and don't sweat it and don't regret it. Yes, you learn a lesson. All right, I could have been more careful, I could have shopped around better, I could have been more responsible. But in the end, if you lose something material, then it is no great loss. But if you lose your life, your youth, your health, your time, these opportunities that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you, then that is a loss that should really concern you, and you want to ensure that you do not repeat it. Now, what should we spend our time with? This is also a hadith from our seventh Imam. On the day of judgment, our actions will be weighed. Now, in this digital age, I don't know how many of you have seen those old scales where there is a balance and you put the merchandise on one side and then there is a series of weights you put on the other side. And that is how you tell the relative weight of two things. Whichever comes down, that is heavier and more valuable. And so the scale will weigh two different things and see the relative mass. So you want to make sure that when your good deeds and your bad deeds are measured in that way, the bad deeds are not heavier than the good deeds. Because you want to have more good deeds such that you are worthy of God's forgiveness and reward rather than God's punishment. So, when it comes to good deeds, you want to look for those good deeds that have the greatest weight. If you have good deeds that are going to ensure that Allah will reward you, will forgive you, that you are worthy of His mercy, you don't want to put things that weigh a feather. You want to put things that are heavy, that will bring that scale down. And our seventh Imam, Imam Musa Kadhim alayhi salam, is reported to have said that there is nothing that is أثقل في الميزان ليس شيء أثقل في الميزان من الصلاة على محمد وآل محمد. So normally we kill time by going on social media. I'm as guilty as anyone else. We spend the time that we have that is dead time while we're waiting in line, or when we have nothing else to do, we're waiting for somebody just before an appointment. We spend that time with our phones, or maybe just lost in thought, or doing something that might not be productive. But we don't have to think of those moments as dead time, because even in that moment, when you are waiting, you can do something that has a greater weight in the book of deeds than any other good deed that you can do. There is nothing heavier and weightier and worthier for you to put in your book of good deeds than to send salutations on our Prophet and his progeny. Once again, Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. And sometimes people think that, well, that's just words. And so why does it have that great weight? But the reality is that salat is not words. It is an intention and an orientation. It is a recognition that the greatest good that can come to me and to all of us is through our Prophet and the progeny of the Prophet. Guidance, it comes through them. God's favor and grace and sustenance and everything good that we want in our life and everything that we need in the hereafter, it doesn't come to us through any other intermediary but Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So this is not just empty words, but if you fill your day with the remembrance, the prayer, the salutation on the Prophet and his progeny, then you are orienting yourself towards what is the true source of guidance, the true solution to all of your problems, the best utilization of all of the resources and the gifts that Allah has given you. It is in the path, in the love, in the remembrance of the lives and the teachings of Ahlul Bayt. And so our seventh Imam tells us that orient and remember. And if you want to do dhikr of Allah, then you remember Allah by following, obeying, connecting and remembering Muhammad wa ali Muhammad alayhimus salatu wassalam. And in the time of their martyrdom, we remember them by remembering their suffering. 35 years, Imam Musa Al-Kadhim alayhi salam. He was the guide, the leader of the Muslim Ummah. But throughout that time, he was always subject to the jealousy and to the oppression of the governments of his time. Until Harun, he said that I cannot enjoy my power and my wealth so long as Imam Musa Al-Kadhim is alive. And he gave the order for Imam Musa Al-Kadhim to be placed under house arrest. And it was something very unique about the beauty of the character of our seventh Imam, that when he was a prisoner, those who watched over him and were his jailers would see his ibadah. It was as if the Imam would spend his entire day and his entire night in sujood. And sometimes those jailers, they say that we would look and we would think that in his jail cell there was no human being, but there was just a cloth that had been spread on the earth. And then we would see that it is Imam Musa Al-Kadhim who is in prayer, fasting by day, praying throughout the night, reciting Quran with such a beautiful voice that even his jailers would become his lovers, until the news would come to Harun and he would send a message that find a jailer who is even more hard-hearted and cruel, so that he will have no mercy on Imam Musa Kadhim. فَمَا زَالَ يَنْتَقِلُ مِنْ سِجْنٍ إِلَى سِجْنٍ. It is said that Imam Musa Al-Kadhim was taken from one prison to another, because there was no one who would not be inspired by the character, the prayer, the devotion of Imam Musa Kadhim to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. From Basra to Baghdad, from one jail until another, until Harun said, "Who is the cruelest person among all of my officers? Let me put Musa Al-Kadhim alayhi salam under his imprisonment, so he will show him no mercy." And that was a man known as Sindi ibn Shahik. When Imam Musa Al-Kadhim was first put in prison, he prayed to Allah and he said that, "Oh Allah, I have always asked you to give me an opportunity where I have no worldly distractions and where I can worship you as my heart desires. I thank you, O Allah, that you have caused me to come into prison so that I can worship you." But so cruel was Sindi ibn Shahik in how he dealt with the Imam, so harsh and heartless, that the Imam said that, "Oh Allah, I had prayed to you to allow me an opportunity to worship. Oh Allah, now I ask you to remove me from this world and call me back to yourself." That was the harshness of what our seventh Imam suffered. Harun sent a message that the Imam is to be poisoned. And it was such a severe poison that as it worked its effect on the body of the Imam, his color changed and he lost his ability to speak and even his voice. When people came to his jail cell because the government wanted to claim that the Imam was not poisoned, the Imam could not speak, but he just indicated with his hand and with a very weak voice, he said that I have been poisoned and I am not dying a natural death. This was the sadness and the way in which our Imam was martyred. But we turn our heads towards our Imam, Sayyidul Shuhada, Imam Hussein, and we remember his suffering, that no matter how great the suffering of any of our Imams, in the words of Imam Hassan al-Mujtaba, La yawmaka yawmika ya Aba Abdullah, there is no day like your day, O Abu Abdullah, O Imam Hussein. When 30,000 enemy soldiers, they surrounded you and they drew their swords and they attacked you from all sides, and you were martyred on the plains of Karbala as if you had been hunted, and the hunters showed no mercy. Ala la'natullahi ala al-qawmi al-zalimeen. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept our remembrance and grant us the love and the prayers and the intercession of Ahlul Bayt and their company